Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the 72nd edition of the Winter Show. We're thrilled to have you here today. We've got a fabulous lineup. We're very appreciative to all of you and hope that you'll make it onto the show floor after this wonderful talk. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Peter Leiden, president of the ICAA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. We really appreciate being part of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art here today because it's about celebrating America's 250th anniversary as a theme, and I couldn't think of a better team here on the stage with us to celebrate really the uniqueness of American architecture. Today we have three leading architects that run prestigious firms. They've also won so many awards that I can't even go through the list. I decided to throw that list out. And Michael may have a few more awards than Tom, but Tom, but Tom's trying to catch up to Marieanne.
We're off to a really great start here.
And they're very competitive, this group, in case you haven't noticed. But Michael Imber and Marieanne Khoury-Vogt and Tom Kligerman, we welcome you to this program, and we're so delighted to have these three with us. So our theme is New Perspectives on the American Vernacular, and so it's really about celebrating the communities that these three represent. I wanted to mention that the work that you're going to be seeing on the screen is all new works, and I think that's what I wanted to express, just celebrating the beauty and the genius of these three people. Let's get started, but I wanted to start on a very easy question for each one of you. I wanted to ask you, tell us a bit about your early life, which I'm going to define 18 and younger. Because for an architect, early life could be 35 and younger, as we all know. But it's 18 and younger, and then tell us what really led you to architecture. So it's going to be a couple of simple questions, and then we'll delve into the American vernacular in their regions.
Well, that's an easy question for me. I grew up in West Texas, out in the middle of nowhere, really. And my father used to get these maps from the geologists from the oil company that he worked with, and we would go seek out all these old Indian ruins and campgrounds, and go to these Anasazi ruins and these amazing places in the American West that not a lot of people see, and they've been there for literally thousands of years. And so, as a young man, that made a huge impression on me, and forming the idea of what American architecture should be.
Wow, what a great experience that was. And it was right in your back door, practically.
Well, 3-hour drive for Texas isn't far.
Well, that's the next village, isn't it? Marieanne, please tell us what your early life was like, and how did you get into architecture?
I always start by talking in the we form because I'm an identical twin. And so I never think to say I was born. It's always we. And then in my practice, it's always been we, Eric and I, my husband and partner. But so we were born, my sister and I were born in England, and an immigrant family. We relocated to Lebanon. And then when the Civil War broke out, we had to leave. We thought we were going to leave for a couple of months, but never ended up going back. And France opened its doors to us. And so we lived in France for a number of years, and then 2 years later, my father was able to come and get us, and we went to Jordan for a little bit, and then Abu Dhabi for 2 years, and then his job took him to Saudi Arabia, and for about 10 years. And my sisters and I ended up in France for high school. And then when I was just under 18, during that time, we were lucky that we were able to travel a lot. And so we were exposed to art and to some beautiful cities, very, very different from Paris and London, but to also much poorer cities, but that had such a rich tradition as well. And I wanted to cultivate my creativity, and I thought I wanted to study journalism. But to be successful at journalism in France, you had to do years of political science, and I didn't feel like doing that in French. So I literally thought, let me find something else that will cultivate my sense of creativity, and picked architecture.
Wonderful. How about you, Tom?
So, like Marianne, we moved around a lot when I was young. Not as many countries, although I did live in France and I lived in London periodic for a bit. But we moved around the United States. My father was a university professor in medicine, and I think by the time I was in high school, I'd lived in two New England salt boxes, one of them built in 1665. We lived in an adobe in New Mexico. We spent our summers in Rhode Island in a shingle style house. So I just saw a lot of buildings, and my parents were interested in art. They collected art. My father dated Helen Frankenthaler. So art was always part of life. And in 7th grade, I went to a very progressive school, and you could design your own class. And I designed an architecture design class for myself where I designed houses.
Wow.
So that's where it started. I recently found some of the drawings. They were terrible.
And I think you grew up in the New Haven area, part of that.
Part of it was in New Haven, yeah.
Because Yale had we talked about this, Yale had a big influence on both of us. We had both ended up going to Yale, but then summering nearby in Branford and Guilford and seeing those houses, you couldn't discount those beautiful homes on the shore there. Too.
Right.
I think that had a little influence on you as well.
Yeah, the salt boxes were in Guilford, Connecticut.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's where Eric's from.
Because Texas is bigger than and better than most places, we thought we would really start off the American vernacular. And Michael's work is just awe-inspiring. And I think in every sense of the way, from craftsmanship to the materials to everything you see. We just finished a video together that we're producing on the ranch house. And I thought it may be interesting for this audience just to start with you obviously do other types of architecture, but the ranch house I find fascinating. And there's so many reasons I'm putting that out there, like, is it still popular? Did it lose its way? Did people forget the American vernacular and all the things all those years? Did they rediscover it? Those kind of things. So if you can take us, and why is the American ranch house so, in our minds, just the ideal place?
That's a really interesting question, Peter. I think to answer that, the Texas ranch house has always been a bastion of culture and a reflection of the landscape. It started out obviously as something that was very practical, part of the industry in Texas. But as things evolved in Texas, it became Texas' version of the pleasure, estate or ranch, or where families would escape and get out of the cities. And it was always the true expression of who we were as a culture. That was a chance for them to go up and play with cattle and hunt and fish and all those things. And usually these houses were a reflection of many years of Spanish influence or German influence.
Exactly.
And built out of local materials. And so culturally, there was a strong identity with what the ranch house was.
Right.
And still is today. So.
Well, do you think it's in favor today? Do you think it's more popular? And the reason I'm asking is because you're looking at local stone, you're looking at tin roofs, you're looking at materials that you could get right in that region. But it seems to me there's more younger people wanting to have that type of house. The patios, the porches, the little shaded areas. It just seems like the ideal place for a lot of people to escape.
That Texas is big. This landscape is dramatic.
Right.
And to me, it's this connection to that landscape and who we are that brings people to identify with the ranch. And so it's still very, very popular today. And you find ranches all over Texas in every part. So.
Well, just to hop to Marianne, Marianne recently won our Ross Awards, and then I delved into her work a few years ago, and I just wanted to survey the people in this room. Have you heard or have you been to Alice Beach in Florida? Anyone in this room? So that's there's only a few people down in Florida, our members are building new cities, new towns all over the South. And Marianne's vision, and she's part of a community where they built these beautiful, I'll let you describe the community, but how do you feel that you're part of this community of place, and how does the vernacular American experience feed into that?
So yeah, Alice Beach it's a third generation new urbanist town that was master planned by Duane Plater Zyberg, DPZ and Company. The original vision started with them, where they had the idea of designing a town that married the typology of the Antiguan Guatemalan patio house with the architecture of Bermuda. And I won't necessarily go into all of the reasons why, because it's long, but it was basically an invented style, and it sits around 30 feet above the water, but it's on the Gulf of Mexico, and it's a spectacular site. And when Eric and I took the job of town architects, we left our practice in Miami, and we told all of our friends we're going to do this gig for 2 or 3 years. And my friend said, "Oh, you're going to move to the South?" And I was like, "Well, I'm in Miami. I live in the South." And they were like, "Oh no, it's not the South." And I didn't really know what that meant until until we moved there. But we saw it. Eric and I saw it psychologically as relocating our practice. We had started our practice a few years years before in Miami, and this defied kind of our expectations. We're very proud to be part of a town that there's the work of many architects. Michael has designed quite a bit in Alice, as have other architects. And I don't know that it's necessarily the American vernacular. It really is a different kind of style. And over the years, it has been inflected with a lot of Moorish and Mediterranean flares and accents, which I think we brought into the work. I guess what Alice is known for, it's spectacularly beautiful. The urbanism is very consistent. The architecture is quite unique, but it also is very sustainable because it is built with fortified masonry. And it, I think, reintroduced a little bit to the South the idea of courtyard living, which is very evocative and seductive and beautiful. And so, yeah, that's how.
There is a connection between early Florida homes and there. You've just adapted things along the way, but you have the same principles of the earlier houses, the thicker walls, the different design, and the materials that you use there are brilliant.
Yeah, it is essentially it is a tradition. It's traditional beach houses, but that just are expressed, I guess, in a different way. But it's the use of masonry, and then wood and metal are introduced a little bit more as decorative elements. But the key is really mostly masonry construction. But it's built to withstand hurricane force winds. And so in some ways, the most enduring thing you can do is build an architecture that's going to last and doesn't have this whole cycle, because we're going to have hurricanes. That doesn't have to have a whole cycle of rebuilding, repainting, all of that happens.
It's much more urban than
It's very, very,
typical
yes,
Florida.
it is much more urban than typical Florida, correct. Yeah.
Terrific. Well, let's hear from Tom, because Tom's work is just awe-inspiring as well. But obviously there is a theme of the shingle style. I think that you are drawn to that, and I was wondering, how does that feed into the American vernacular? Do you see it resurging? Was it always there? I'd love to, what does it really do to, why pick a shingle house to begin with?
The shingle style has been around for a long time in the United States. It's a mixture of styles, but it's a mixture of Victorian architecture and colonial architecture. And the colonial architecture goes way back to when the English came over. Nantucket has the oldest house in in Nantucket, which is a shingle building from 1638 or something like that. I keep wanting to say the Jethro Tull house. It's actually the Jethro somebody else house. At the time, there were these forests everywhere, and where the English had come over coming from a tradition of architecture made out of tiles on the side of the building. They got to this country and it was wood. And so it goes way back. It really became the shingle style as we know it in around 1879 or so. McKimby and White started building houses in Newport, Rhode Island, like the Tennis Hall of Fame many of you have been to, is the Newport Casino. So it's rooted in the area just by nature of its materials, its verandas for capturing ocean breezes, that's where it comes from. And when it started in the 1880s, it was actually a very modern style of architecture. Houses up until then had very sort of rigid axial plans. They were based often on European precedents like Georgian architecture or French architecture, but the shingle style is indigenously American. It comes from two styles here. And the plans were free flowing and the windows went down to the floor. Certain houses, the windows pocket up into the walls. The elevations are not symmetrical. They're very episodic and painterly. That period during the 1880s is my favorite time for the style because it was the houses were very abstract. They've become over time adaptations of Georgian houses and things like that. They got more formal in a way. But I think it's always been popular, certainly by the ocean. Vincent Scully, who was an architectural critic at Yale University, gave it its name. It was called the New Colonial Style originally in the 1880s. In 1854, he names it the shingle style. I think it's always been popular, and I think it continues to be.
And also, I think Bob Stern had a big influence bringing
Yeah.
back the style,
Bob-
uplifting it.
Right. I worked for Bob as a student of Bob's at Columbia. Then I worked for him for a number of years before starting my own practice. And he was a student of Scully's, and he was really imbued in that whole American tradition. And he did do a lot of, in the 70s in particular, very abstract, modern shingle-style buildings, which I used to hate. And now I love them because they're very quirky and interesting and unique. You recognize his work.
When I think of American vernacular of architecture, I think of really kind of four movements. There's the indigenous, of course, the very first, which is very organic and very well connected to nature. There is colonial architecture where people brought over their beliefs and culture and technologies and adapted them to the landscape here in America. And then, as Tom says, with the shingle style, that was the very first time Americans really created a style of architecture that related to American culture and this idea of nature. It was the first time we divorced ourselves from Europe and did something on our own. And then all of that was somewhat lost to the international style. And now what we see is this new American vernacular.
That's what I'm saying.
Which is really represented by Tom's new shingle style work and Marieanne's work down in Alice Beach, that is this new understanding of who we are culturally and this relationship to the landscape and who we are and place, that the international school or modernists just simply turn their back to. So it's this kind of rediscovery.
I want to throw a little wrench into that. So way before the English came over, the Native Americans in northwestern New Mexico and that area, they were creating these incredible buildings. You referenced them, Chaco Canyon and places like that. Really, that's an even early American style of architecture. And Frank, I think it feeds into a lot of what you do, Chaco Canyon and some of those places with those incredible buildings that were done 1,300 years ago. It's really almost an American Rome when you go look at these ruins. So
Very communal.
So the shingle style is uniquely American, but there's also that style that came out of the Southwest, which is as well, and I think feeds into the ranch houses, the things you've been designing.
Well, and that grew out of the shingle style when those ideas of the shingle style went out west. And, the West began to see how we can begin to connect back to the landscape and the architecture that pre-existed. So this cycle.
Yeah. It's actually interesting, not that we don't only do shingle style buildings, we do a lot of buildings of different styles, but we seem to be known for it because I talk about it all the time. It's a style that's found across the U.S. It started in the 1880s, and it just went like wildfire, went across to San Francisco, Texas, Florida. There's not a state in the Union, Alaska, where you can't find shingle-style buildings.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I think the word resurgence is what we're seeing. Even though you said ranch houses has been popular, what we're seeing is a lot of younger people asking where they can find traditional architects that do all this stuff. So you could see we're also very busy in our community. So it's really great that they're rediscovering it. Like, what did we leave that period? We kind of know that we were forced to leave at a certain time, but do you feel that energy coming back in your practice about younger people selecting traditional ways? And also, I wanted to address the crafts involved in each of your areas, because that's an important element.
No, absolutely. It's kind of shocking when we have clients that are the age of our kids, coming to us for an architecture that is expressive of identity in place. It's rewarding in that they were offered this ambiguity of modern architecture that has no identity, and I feel like there's this hunger for that identity again. And so, yeah, we've got, all levels of generations that come to us, to look for houses that feel as though they belong, and most importantly, are generational. And they associate that identity of feeling as though the house belongs to longevity.
But they are related, but they also don't want something stuffy and old-fashioned either.
True.
So one of the tricks is, how do you do something that is traditional but is a modern, in its function and stuff? An old shingle-style house had tiny windows. They were incredibly dark, and the windows are bigger now. So it's how you take that and make it livable too.
Yeah, we're all designing to modern lifestyles.
Yeah, and also this whole focus is new perspectives. So we really wanted to hear from all of you, like, how do you adapt what was really once was to the modern audience of today? Marieanne, do you see changes in your designs or, over the past years? What do you offer that's different?
Well, to answer a little bit the previous question that you asked, I think that in our work, certainly because we've been so involved in Alice Beach for so long, is that we are not only about the individual building, but it's also about composing a streetscape, and it's about community as well, which is really key. And so we have definitely seen the appeal multi-generational for people who are really seeking a place where they feel like they have a shared common respect for the common areas and civic spaces, and a sense of belonging to a place where a lot of attention is paid to the pedestrian scale, and to really creating places where you can gather as a family or with friends, both in the private realm and in the public realm as well. I think in our work, we have a framework that we work within, which is very much rooted in classicism and in traditional architecture. It has a lot of the rigor and restraint that has, but it's not necessarily nostalgic, and we tend to try to reinterpret it in a little bit of a more modern way so that it's a reflection of today. And I think that appeals to many different generations, younger and older.
I think another thing that this new outlook on vernacular architecture offers is this idea of creating an experience. And if you talk about transition as of late during COVID, we really saw a resurgence in families wanting to build on a single piece of land. To be able to set this idea of you truly having a lifestyle of something that's meaningful, and all of these different styles of architecture offer this idea of, it's almost, you can create a movie set out of each of these houses as you move through space, as you move towards light, as you have inflection of different proportion of spaces, as you move through an opening of one of Marieanne's houses into a courtyard with the pool. It's these experiences that this type of architecture can offer that really draws young people today.
I'm always fascinated by that. Tom, you wanted to comment to that point?
I was just building on what both Marieanne and Michael have said, and thinking about younger generations and stuff. I think people are drawn to these things because they're familiar. They're part of the culture. You grow up in New England. It's just in your blood. You grow up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The adobe is in your blood. I think one of the tricks, and I think the three of us are fairly successful at it, is taking something familiar and giving it your own personal kind of twist or personality. And one of the things we strive for is not simply copying older houses or shingle style houses that, again, when I think back to the 1880s and the things McKim, Eden White, and others were doing, it was modern. It was very personal. You could recognize those houses. And so at our office, we're constantly thinking about, well, what is somebody 120 years from now going to say about our work? Will they be captivated by it or notice it? Will someone say, God, have you ever heard of these guys? Look at this. That's kind of what we try, sort of the 100-year office. So we want to work in a way that is very familiar, but we don't want it to be like it came out of a factory someplace. And so we're constantly trying to modernize it in a way, trying to get it elemental, trying to abstract it, and looking back at previous jobs we've done, how do we take that a step further?
And you have to add your own voice, because
You have to have your own
feel
voice,
like you may be criticized by another professional, but I think it has to be your own voice in your own design.
I agree. I mean, I think it behooves all of us as architects to do something different to sort of bend the arc of architectural history,
Right.
and not simply repeat. Where does that get you?
Well,
Where does it get the history of architecture?
Marianne's too young to remember this, but postmodern architecture,
Yeah.
was all about, mimicking history without
Yeah,
copy.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
And but it did teach us something, in that, okay, we're not copying history, we're not creating museums to live in, we're understanding a vocabulary, a language, and we're evolving that into something new.
Yeah, and I also think that if you are familiar with the postmodern style, it was very cartoonish and graphic and colorful and almost architectural jokes. But I think it was almost like a teenager having to leave home, having to break with this sort of modern style that had been going on.
Used to do anything their parents did.
But it was something that the style that architecture had to go through to kind of come out on the other side.
Yeah.
Something a little more serious.
We're also very lucky in that we work with the three of us, and we're not, many firms do, but we're lucky that we work with really fantastic craftsmen. So if we draw it, they can build it. And it's in the case of, let's say, Eric and I, and the work that we do in Alice, we had Seaside and Rosemary Beach before us, and a whole generation of craftsmen grew up. And learning how to detail correctly, how to build correctly, how to build in a way that was going to sustain the strongest winds, and we've just been lucky to be able to take advantage of all of that. But it's a fortunate thing to be able to build in an environment like this.
Well, I think that's a really important point, because, our friends in Europe, they're always saying there's craftspeople are dying out in the next generation. And they don't realize in many of our regions in America, we have such fabulous crafts that are being produced and made and in abundance. And getting to your point about the romance of walking through the house, I mean, all of your houses, I feel romance is a part of it. Because, like for Michael, there's the bell that you ring to tell everyone dinner. It's this beautiful metal piece. Or it could be these beautiful gates that you make, Marieanne, the metal. I don't know who's doing all that, but it's like with incredible design work. And same with Tom, just the elements and the metal work around some of your houses that you're using. So my question is about, you do have that access. Is it still in good shape, or do you see more interest?
I think one of the things people say all the time is, "Oh, you could never do this today." Well, in fact, you can. In fact, these rooms have all been done relatively recently, so all these crafts exist. And obviously, there's great crafts in Europe and France, but we have incredible metal workers. We have incredible masons and ability to carve stone floors. It's all doable. It is often a matter of money and time. These things don't happen overnight, but those crafts exist.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Here's what we believe in deeply, is that it is expensive, but if there's anything worth spending money on, it's having a home that embodies the spirit of a craftsman. They live their life thinking about what they can do with their hands, and to engage this craftsman and have them share that craft and leave it with this home for generations is truly a gift, and it's worth something.
And there are also, there are organizations like the Princess Foundation, well, the king now, but it was the Princess Foundation for a long time that, for example, they had this, they were working at Turquoise Mountain. They had this company where they sent in Afghanistan and in Jordan, where they would try to resurrect some of these lost trades. And it was the old craftsmen teaching a whole new generation how to carve and how to do a lot of the details that we draw and that are done. And so you have now a new generation growing up with the tools and the know-withal of how to do it. And you can often get it at prices that are a little bit more competitive.
The craft also is not just what it looks like. I mean, I think one of the things about these great crafts is in a room like this, you walk in and you want to put your hand on the woodwork. It really involves all senses. My wife and I just designed a house in Rhode Island, and it was purposely designed to sound a certain way. I know it sounds funny, to smell a certain. You walk in and it smells like oak and mahogany and cedar, and so all that's from crafts and the correct collection of materials. That it is this romantic experience, but it's also draws on people's memories of what a house sounded like when they were growing up. Everyone can probably remember what it sounded like your father coming up the stairs when you're in trouble. You knew that sound. So how do you bring that into a new house? How do you create those sort of worlds for people that will be what they think about in 20 years?
Yeah,
Think about the house.
it's funny you say that, Tom. One of the things we talk about is that sound of the gravel crunching as you arrive at the ranch house.
Or
this is the sound of a country house.
Yeah, or the screen door. They don't really, I don't think, have screen doors in France the way we do. They don't have the front porch in the same way. They don't hear people clunking across the street.
Door squeaky.
Rusty. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention that I'm so impressed is the time that all of you take looking at the landscape before you create these American vernacular beautiful pieces. But you seem to spend a lot of time so it fits into the landscape. And funny enough, you both love your watercolors and your drawing, and I think maybe that helps with the answer. I could be wrong, but I wanted to hear your response from that.
Well, yeah, I think the famous case is John Calvin Stevens, who designed Winslow Homer Studio in Maine. Used to go up and paint every site as this almost ceremonial seeing of the site.
Yeah.
And I try to do that often, not on every project, but projects that sit within a beautiful landscape, is to go and paint it. You get to know time slows down, and you feel the sun on your back. You hear the crickets. You smell the sage. You get to know the site in a way that just a photograph could never compare.
I mean, it really teaches you not only the sounds. I guess I was just talking about sound and scent and stuff like that, but also you do a watercolor and you have to learn how to see, and you can bring your own ideas to the painting, but really what I try and do is just paint what I see, not kind of what I know. And so you do slow down, and it is a way to introduce yourself to the culture of the area or the landscape or the water, whatever it is. So
Now, here's an interesting point. I mean, obviously, you just don't design homes in your local area, because I know, for example, you design houses in New England and Maine. And when you go into each other's territories, do you feel there's a little pressure from your
I
colleagues?
love it. I love the houses we're doing in Houston and Dallas. I'm working on San Antonio.
Just got a project in New York, Tom.
drive him crazy.
Any comments on your other, just so they know you're not
We've never talked about
It
that
has
before.
to do with our colleagues so much as it
Yeah.
is incumbent upon us to really respect the place
Exactly.
and to really try to understand it in a way that that deeply, and not just on a surface. You see that so often that some architects may work in a place they never worked for, and they just go look at some pictures, and on the surface they know that an arch means Spanish, and this means that and that, and the soul's not really there.
No.
And if you can dive in deeply and really try to understand the place, that's what you're seeking, is that soul of a place.
I think we all like to learn. I think everybody likes to learn. I think in our office we try and set up situations where all the architects are learning something. There are a number here. I hope I'm right when I say this. And one of the great things about working, for example, when you work in Texas or California or Oregon or Colorado, wherever, Mexico, that you are learning something, and seeing, and you actually bring that, we bring some of the ideas of, say, New Mexico architecture to the shingle style, believe it or not, or Japanese architecture into shingle style. We have a style we call in the office our origami style. We have a style we call Shinglish, which is English cottages, a shingle style. We talk about speaking Shinglish. So it's all about learning and bringing these ideas together in sort of unexpected ways.
Well, I think we should take a few questions from the audience.
A lot of exciting things happening in residential architecture. I'm curious to know, and I know this is not your specialty, whether you see any movement away from the international style and abstract modernism in commercial, office, and institutional buildings. Are we likely to see any more soul in architecture in the commercial side?
We're being requested quite a bit these days to bring that to commercial and institutional work. We really saw ourselves as a residential firm, but now we're doing much more commercial and institutional work where the clients are asking for something that belongs.
Recently, we do work with the King's Foundation, and I was in the position where he did invite me this past year to visit in his personal home. And he asked me, please bring and show me what's happening in America. And he was really astounded to learn all the material, like the new towns we're building with our members, the courtyards, the cathedrals, the libraries. When you start looking at the ICA members, it's really inspiring. And I did particularly show the three of you. What I found is he just did not know what was really happening. You hear about Poundbury in England and very few things, but our magnitude as an organization and our members' work, it was just inspiring. So I see to answer that point, I'm seeing more of the urban experience being part of your work, Michael. I think that's coming up quite heavily, actually. Did you want to add anything, Marieanne, to that?
No, Matt, that we may be more known also for residential work, but we have certainly dabbled a fair share in, I would call it light commercial. And for us and for our work as well, it's just very much about rooting it in a place that people will feel that this building will endure the test of time and that it has a place of belonging, that it can be a beloved building because there's been attention paid to materiality and craftsmanship and how these materials will patina over time. And so I think we take those elements that make the residences so special and we try to apply them to the commercial work that we do.
It's interesting that you say that, Peter, that even when we're asked to do a college project that is classical, the request is that it be truly American.
Exactly.
And so that's
the whole
quite
point.
fun to dabble in.
Well, that I've seen some of Michael's recent campus work and stuff. It's really incredible, these Gothic buildings and stuff. But part of the American tradition is European styles. I mean, you look at Yale University, the College Gothic, and these Georgian houses on the main line in Philadelphia and things like that. So part of American architecture is drawing almost literally on some of these European
The
precedents.
DNA, and how do you bring that DNA?
But I think there is an American flavor. There is, I think it's our own in many of these examples that you gave.
Yeah,
So you really will see the magnitude of shingle houses only in America, truthfully.
Yeah, well, Americans, it's part of the American dream to build your own home, and no one's really immune to it. Whether it's a simple house or someone who's very wealthy, Americans want, that's the American to have your own home.
Exactly.
You mentioned vernacular architecture, especially as it relates to Michael, you brought up Native American architecture. Tom, you brought up Adobe. Marieanne, especially with Alice Beach. I was curious to know your thoughts on creating a new vernacular architecture, obviously designed by architects.
I mean, I think the opportunity this affords is that one can be very inventive, but yet still ground the work in a typology that is recognizable and that makes sense because it has a belonging. It works with the climate and the culture and the use of the spaces. And so I think that it's, I don't know that I would call it American vernacular, but I think it makes all the sense in the world when you're designing a place that is adjacent to the ocean, where you have to think about how the sunlight moves, how the breezes move, how you can take advantage of that in a home, how when you design a courtyard, you do need to think about all of those things so that you have a space that's not only going to be passive, but it's going to be used and enjoyed because it's temperate. And all of those little considerations have been taken into the design process.
How do you bring your own personality, your own take on it, where you're not really escaping it, but you're giving it a new voice and tilting again the arc of a particular style in a way that builds on things in the past. It's new, interesting. Some people might not know why it's different, but they see it's different. Some people who have studied architecture more might go, "Oh, that's amazing! I hadn't thought of that." But I think it's not escaping it, if I'm reading what you said, right, Todd, but more what you do with it. It's like handing someone a paintbrush and blue paint. Everybody's gonna do something different. How do you make it something that people go, "Oh, that's Michael's," or "That's Marieanne's," or how do you make it yours and still keep it rooted?
And not only that, but also how do you make sure that it reflects the desires of your client? So that can be at times a little bit challenging, but it's critical to do it right.
Yeah, I think that's important because you don't want to be known for doing one thing. And so your clients often come to you because they've seen something that you've done before. But it's always about trying to find that seed that makes that particular building its own. And a lot of that comes from your creativity, as Tom said, but it comes from that place. It comes from the program. It comes from the environment in which you're building. It's all of these things that come together, all of these forces that come together to create something new and unique.
It's interesting when you talk about creating things. You do it long enough, and I've been doing it longer than I'd like to admit, but
And all of us.
you got me back. There are times when we'll be struggling with something because we're thinking about it so much, and I find you just take the pen or the pencil and you just go, it really should be this, and it just subconsciously comes out. That's part of it, is just the subconscious is sort of tapping into that.
It's interesting.
First of all, I wanted to thank everyone for coming out on this very freezing day. And if you're not familiar with the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art, please check out classicist.org for our lectures, our programming, educational opportunities, travel trips, films. There's a lot going on. We'd love you to join us here in New York or our chapters across the country. I really wanted to thank this wonderful panel. I hope you all delve into their work after this talk, because I'm not saying this, but I meant the detail, the beauty, and it really will tell you about the materials of that location. It'll be very evident and they do have books and everything else. So anyways, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.